It all began with a stone, or so the legend says. In ages past, a sentient jewel, enormous and beautiful, banished the darkness. Its many-colored light filled the world with life.
Hi, my name's Rebecca Tripp, and I'm going to talk to you about my favorite video game franchise, which is, if you haven't guessed from looking at my YouTube, Final Fantasy. So what I'm going to be talking about is the psychology and the philosophy contained within it. It's a game series that's been around a while, as most of you know. There's quite a lot of depth to a lot of the stories. There's a lot going on there, and if you look under the surface, you'll find a lot of parallels, a lot of things that the series has in common with itself in all the game installments. So I started writing this thesis about the game. I've been noticing the patterns for over a decade, and I just started writing down things that were repeating in each game and their possible meanings, and I found some really interesting things with each playthrough, and I came up with some theories. So when I started writing it, it was in 2011. In 2011, the game had been around for 24 years, and there were over 30 installments, and that's not including the remakes. So that's a lot of games, and there will likely be many more. There's many projects in development that we probably don't even know about, and that's probably because gamers can't seem to get enough Final Fantasy, so I'm going to talk about why. So I'm going to start with a little bit of history. So if you're a very avid fan, you probably know some of this, but let's talk about Square Enix. It was formerly known as Squaresoft, before their merger with Enix.
Square has created some games that I would describe as exquisite. Take a look at this list. We got Secret of Mana, Chrono Trigger, Front Mission.
These Japanese developers have had rosters of programmers, artists, and directors that some people could describe as complete geniuses and master designers. Some of the media that Squaresoft has produced has been so incredibly beautiful, unique, and groundbreaking that it has made video game history. If you don't believe me, you can talk to a Chrono Trigger fan, or talk to a Final Fantasy fan. Final Fantasy is among the video game franchises that have captivated millions of gamers and non-gamers across the globe, and there are a number of reasons for its amazing success.
I think that many of these reasons are psychological.
So, how did the series get its name? Well, the original creator of the game was Hironobu Sakaguchi, and that was in 1987. And he was on the verge of abandoning his dream of making games and returning to university. Squaresoft was also on the verge of bankruptcy. The title of the game reflected the hopes of both Squaresoft and Sakaguchi. It was the final effort to make a fantasy series that would get off the ground and save the company. The success of Final Fantasy on the NES was great enough to generate revenue. It sold over 400,000 copies, and today the series still thrives, making millions on each installment. So, why do we love FF? Well, there's one very obvious reason that people love it. It does a really great job of pulling us in. With the beautiful graphics, the classy artistic direction, and engaging, catchy, and enchanting music, it is very easy to get lost in the aesthetics of Gaia, Terra, Ivalice, or Spira. The video games have some of the most memorable characters, artwork, and music in gaming history. They also have some beautifully heartwarming stories, and a completely unique universe with colorful, varied world settings. Some of the games have addictive battle systems, customizable characters, and in-depth class systems. There are a variety of gameplay mechanics pioneered by Squaresoft that gamers have enjoyed for decades. So, there's no question that it's pulled some of us in, but why? I mean, arguably, there are thousands of equally good games out there. So, what is it that really captivates FF fans?
The DS is amazing. amazing! It's been a while since I've played Final Fantasy I. I was talking about what got the fans drawn into the series in the first place. I wonder how FF1 holds up against all this. Ah! There! Did you see that? Look! Yeah! Well... Okay, I still love this game anyway and think it's gold.
One could say that it's the timing.
It was born in an experimental age of gaming, and it had an opportunity to plant itself in some eager new minds who were hungry for sci-fi and fantasy. For instance, fans of Dungeons & Dragons or Tolkien were ready to try new epic adventures, and Final Fantasy fit the bill. It certainly wasn't the only fantasy game available, however. As a matter of fact, the series was and is highly derivative. The series borrows from Dragon Quest, it borrows from Dungeons & Dragons, it borrows from the Tolkien universe, and it borrows consistently from Star Wars.
Why was I so consumed by hate?
You've regained your senses then. Do you remember your father's name?
My father, his name was Kruya.
Then you're Cecil's own
Brother? Goldbase is mine. You were being manipulated by the all-powerful will of Zemus.
The Senate may play at intrigue, but Lord Vane is not one to be brought down easily. The entire military waits upon his orders, from the War Council down to the rank and file. What better blade than he to strike down the enemies of the Empire?
Your Honor reminds me of Zect 2 years since. He, too, put his trust in Lord Vane's strength, and what became of him? Gone without a trace since Nabudis.
I will not hear you malign Judge Sect. He was a noble warrior. Or do you think his trust in Lord Vane ill-placed?
There are several other things that it alludes to, including Hindu, Hebrew, Japanese, Celtic, Chinese, and Greek mythology and mysticism. Something else that I feel is worth mentioning is that in the first 5 Final Fantasy games, there are references to several very famous, well-liked pieces of classical music.
With the following succession of installments after FF1, Sakaguchi was able to create games that were increasingly beautiful and fun to play, introducing new elements in each retelling and remaining true to his winning formula. This concoction of iconic self-referential repetition of events, themes, and characters and diverse cultural themes made the games easily accessible. The player could explore and grow within a superficial comfort zone. Like Dragon Quest, a series that was thought of by many as Final Fantasy's rival, the game had a distinctiveness that grew on gamers in multiple nations. And the identity of the series only continued to solidify as the 1990s rolled by. By the time the game graduated from the original Nintendo to Super Nintendo, Squaresoft's customers were loyal and eager. I believe that it was consistency that kept us interested. There is a special feeling present in many of the games that tells the player right off the bat that it is Final Fantasy that they're playing.
How long I've waited! Gilgamesh fights again!
Although the specifics of this are highly subjective, in most of the games, an equilibrium was maintained that allowed the series to grow and change, without ever abandoning the qualities that sculpted it into what it was. In the 90s, virtually all of the successful game sequels did this. Nintendo's Legend of Zelda, Mario, and Metroid, for example, or Konami's Castlevania and Metal Gear Solid. They maintained a formula of steady growth along a fixed path. But, as we are aware, the times are changing, and they were changing in the 90s as well. After Final Fantasy V, Sakaguchi became the vice president at Square USA in 1995, and he did not direct the 6th, 7th, or 8th games. However, he did return to direct Final Fantasy IX. The games that were not directed by Sakaguchi, in my opinion, were still brilliant games, but most fans, including myself, would argue that the feeling of the series took a turn in the mid-90s, either for better or for worse. Something to note is that there have been a few different generations of gamers. The advents of the Super Nintendo, the PlayStation, and the PlayStation 2 were epochs in Final Fantasy's timeline, during which influxes of fresh new gamers jumped on board. Because of this, there are, and likely always will be, many conflicting opinions about which Final Fantasy is the best, which is the worst, and which ones belong, and which ones do not belong. Personally, I would argue that they all belong, for reasons that I will be explaining later. I genuinely love them all. However, I do have a few favorites. I would say Final Fantasy 4, 5, 6, and 9 are my favorites. Are probably the art, the music, and the story of each of those games. That's usually what I go for. Final Fantasy tends to tell the same story over and over again. There are some moderations, and the actual plot of a given game always has at least one new element to keep it fresh, whether it's a new gameplay mechanic, like controlling an esper, a unique main character, like Cloud, or a new race, like Taru Taru, but there are some things that are generally the same every time. I have heard and read a variety of reviews and criticisms of the games, describing them as boring, having too much text, too much story, not enough action, and not enough customizability.
It is certainly nothing like the Elder Scrolls series, for example. It may seem counterintuitive, but in some cases, playing a linear, predictable game can give the player a deeper sense of control than they would get from a game with more options and modes of gameplay. I believe it is comforting for the FF gamer to play a fixed story. It gives him a place where he can feel safe, knowing that all his friends will be there, and that good will always win over evil. By projecting himself into a heavily controlled environment, he is exercising more control over his own life. This is a time for him to know exactly where he is going, and who he will become. The games provide enough characters, classes, and plot twists to keep the majority of their fans interested, without ever forcing them to make difficult choices.
Instead, it gives them hundreds of small, safe choices.
But the Final Fantasy franchise has offered many other modes of gameplay.
There are copious amounts of non-main series spin-off games and sequels in Square Enix's Final Fantasy franchise. The main series games also contain generous amounts of mini-games, some of which are optional and some of which are not. There is also a rather astonishing amount of micromanagement in most of the games, particularly FF Tactics, 8, 10, and 13. These things provide the player with a deeper sense of participation, giving the player the means to project themselves further by placing games within games. As many are likely aware, it is a great way to waste time. This is very evident in Final Fantasy XI and 14, both of which have as many tasks, quests, mini-games, and as much busy work as any respectable MMORPG player could ask for. But some of the other games come close. FF12 and 13 send the player back and forth on fetch quests to slay monsters ranging anywhere from the size of a chicken to the size of a mountain. This is very evident in Final Fantasy XI and 14, both of which have as many tasks, quests, mini-games, and as much busy work as any respectable MMORPG player could ask for. Because the players are usually absorbed into the fantasy of the game, they're usually willing to accept the side quests as a way of getting more out of the experience. Level grinding could also be seen this way. It's a similar system designed to reward the player, to give her a sense of achievement and a set of goals. This likely gives the player a sense of accomplishment, and for time and money being well spent. At the core of the formula is the main story. The menu system, the vague plot templates, and the mini-quests are the outer layer of delicious cream-filled metaphoric cake. This center has a few key ingredients. The main ingredient is the journey around the world, leading up to the dramatic endgame, where a small handful of chosen heroes defeat the anti-hero and restore peace and hope to the land. All the sugar and spice, cute moogles, flashy giant swords, sexy young women, and effeminate handsome villains, make this journey lighthearted and fun for the average gamer. In short, the player, in his heart, usually wants to be one of the destined light warriors, if only for a brief time, because he finds the sugary and spicy world to be something worth protecting. This, of course, is only true to an extent, since every gamer is different. In the next video, I'm going to talk about some of the mechanisms that make gamers want to get absorbed into video games, and why Final Fantasy is such an easy game to want to play. I hope you enjoyed this. Give me a thumbs up if you liked it.